Now we've even got, what's his name, Keir Starmer, sir. That bastard excused Jimmy Savile. He's the one who signed off and said there wasn't enough evidence. That bastard is going to be the prime minister. So a guy who literally, who signed off and said not enough evidence of the man what we now know, Sir Jimmy Savile, who raped 500 while being greeted by the Queen and, BBC covering. Keir Starmer, is this acceptable? I'll tell you what, I'd rather die in the fight than bow to that crap.
If you don't live in complete ignorance, then you've certainly heard about the growing rift among Labour MPs. These are not just rumours, this is a real storm, caused by accusations that Keir Starmer is under the influence of elites and takes a controversial position on critical issues, including alleged support for criminal gangs in the country. In this programme, we will try to reveal to you the whole truth about what is happening in the UK and explain why the Labour Party seems to be standing on the edge of a precipice. Although the party's decline may seem slow, it is only the beginning of a catastrophe. Let's find out what the Labour Party is really afraid of. The situation is becoming increasingly alarming. Keir Starmer seems to have prepared his supporters for the fight, while members of the Labour Party are desperately trying to reach out to Elon Musk amid growing rumours that Starmer's empire is crumbling. But there is chaos within the party.
Into Jimmy Savile, but I thought at that time that there simply wasn't the evidence, as the testimony simply wasn't compelling. Also, Savile did have a great standing with people, and so the threshold for any action taken was always going to be higher, and some of the claims felt slightly frivolous. We felt the threshold wasn't met at that time.
Before we start discussing, let's focus on the internal problems of the Labour Party. As Rosie Duffield aptly pointed out, supporting Labour is like staying in a toxic relationship, allowing them to put up with the blatant corruption and harm caused by Starmer and his government. Despite the general discontent that Keir Starmer and his wife receive generous donations from shadowy sponsors and influential bankers, his supporters are trying their best to keep the party afloat. Their efforts to save the party's reputation are being sorely tested, all against the backdrop of Elon Musk's growing influence. Starmer's latest attempts to stop Musk's interference in UK affairs are looking increasingly desperate, especially as local councillors and the public lose faith in his leadership. The contradictions are compounded by shocking accusations. Accusations that Starmer is defending groups accused of serious crimes only add fuel to the fire of public discontent and cast doubt on the future stability of the Labour Party.
But first of all, could I ask you about Elon Musk and where do you stand as regards him sticking his nose into British politics?
Well, look, it's entirely up to people wherever they are to, pontificate on whatever they want to, but we're really concerned here about getting on with governing in this country, which is why we want to get on and talk about the NHS today and waiting lists, because that's
we're going to do that. We're going to do that. But meanwhile, Musk sets the agenda for everybody else. And the truth is, Karen, you're all, whatever party you're from, scared stiff of him. Why?
We want to focus on what's going on in the country. We want to.
Yeah, but he sets the agenda. He said you can try and talk me down all day on this. You're going to give me an answer on this or not. He will dictate the agenda. You know it, everybody around you knows it, and everybody in every other party knows it. Is he ruling our country?
No. Prime Minister's running the country.
The debate about grooming gangs in the UK has reached a critical point. After a recent vote in Parliament, where more than 75% of the country's adult population called for a national investigation into this shocking scandal, Labour MPs voted overwhelmingly against this vital initiative. This caused a storm of outrage and anger, and many accused the Labour Party of covering up for those involved in covering up these heinous crimes. Critics are not shy in their expressions. They claim that Labour MPs have their own dark secrets, and the lack of a full-fledged public inquiry is a deliberate attempt to protect local councils and other institutions that may be involved in these horrific abuses. The public reaction was furious. People stood up for the victims, expressing dissatisfaction with the fact that the Labour Party had not taken any action. It is especially outraging that such influential politicians as Jess Phillips did not take the time to meet with the victims of these gangs. Despite their high positions, frustration and anger are mounting as the victims have been demanding justice for many years, but the authorities continue to ignore their pleas, as if their suffering doesn't matter. This has led to growing calls for an independent investigation, and many believe that if the government refuses to act, individuals and organizations should take on this important mission. The situation requires immediate clarification. Were the consequences of the vote consistent with public opinion, or was the investigation conducted only for the private sector, while the problem continues to grow?
Keir Starmer has lost a Treasury Minister this afternoon. Pressure had been building, as you say, over links between Tulip Siddiq, who in fact in the Treasury was the anti-corruption Minister, and her aunt, Sheikh Hasina, who until last year was Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She was ousted in something of a coup. Since she left office, there's been an anti-corruption investigation into Sheikh Hasina that's still ongoing. Some of the properties that Tulip Siddiq lived in appear to have had links to Sheikh Hasina's family and to members of Sheikh Hasina's political party in Bangladesh. The new Bangladeshi Prime Minister suggesting some of those properties should be the subject of corruption investigations as part of that wider probe into the former Prime Minister. Where does this leave us? Well, over the last few days, since last week, the independent investigator into ministerial interests, an individual called Lori Magnus, has been looking into Tulip Siddiq's affairs on behalf of the Prime Minister, glancing at Tulip Siddiq's letter, what appears to have...
On the 14th of January, 2025, Tulip Siddiq resigned as Finance Minister, and this event caused a real shock in society. Amid the controversy surrounding her family's alleged corruption ties, Siddiq, who also served as the UK's anti-corruption minister, found herself under unbearable pressure. Public attention was focused on her family in Bangladesh, including her aunt, the former Prime Minister, which only increased the tension. Although an independent review found no violations of the ministerial codes, Siddiq decided that continuing her work would distract the government's attention from more important issues. But her resignation has caused a storm of indignation among citizens who feel that no one will bear real responsibility for corruption. Many are convinced that Siddiq's departure is just a clever maneuver to avoid further investigation and conceal the truth. The public cannot accept that, despite serious allegations, no formal charges have been brought against Siddiq and her family. People are full of anger and frustration because they demand justice. While some supporters of Siddiq argue that her resignation was a necessary step, critics see it as just an attempt to avoid consequences for closer ties to a corrupt network.
Happened is that Lori Magnus has said that Tulip Siddiq did not breach any part of the ministerial code. However, the Treasury Minister has herself decided to resign, fearing that the allegations of links to that former Prime Minister, who is now under investigation, she says will be something of a distraction. Just to pick out some key bits of that letter, as you know, having conducted an in-depth review into the matter at my request, Lori Magnus has confirmed, "I have not breached the ministerial code. There's no evidence to suggest I acted improperly in relation to the properties I have owned or lived in, nor to suggest that any of my assets derive from anything other than legitimate means." She said her family connections are a matter of public record, but in that penultimate paragraph, she says, "It's clear that continuing in my role as Economic Secretary to the Treasury is likely to be a distraction for the government. My loyalty will always be to this Labour government and the programme of national renewal. I've therefore decided to resign from my ministerial position."
On the 12th of January, 2025, the Labour Party was on the verge of an internal split over the issue of gangsters and the demand for a national investigation. This happened after a revolt within the party initiated by MP Dan Carden, who supported Andy Burnham in his calls for a public investigation into the Grooming gangs scandal. This move was a signal of possible cracks in the Labour Party's united front on the issue. The controversy escalated when Nigel Farage accused the government of trying to hide the true scale of groomer gangs. This became especially relevant after the Minister of Health stated that public discussion could unfairly denigrate certain communities. This caused a wide public outcry, and many began demanding a comprehensive investigation.
Last night, time and time again, Rishi Sunak was clobbering you over the head with that £2,000 tax line. It took you almost half an hour to call it garbage. What on earth took you so long?
What matters is the facts. None of our plans involve tax rises for working people, and I'll spell it out. No income tax rises, no national insurance, no VAT. But what emerged from last night, and this is a very important takeaway, is that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, with his back against the wall, desperately trying to defend their record in office, resorted to lies
and he knows he was lying. And I don't say that lightly. Lying about our plans, lying about waiting lists, and lying about votes. And therefore the choice at the election is even clearer now, which is to turn our back, turn a page on the lies, the division and the chaos of the last 14 years and rebuild the country with Labour.
Public opinion is determined. The majority in the UK insists on conducting a national investigation into these crimes. Frustration is growing, and people are wondering why such an investigation has not yet been launched. On the 3rd of January, 2025, Sarah Champion, the Labour MP for Rotherham, took a significant step by calling for a national investigation into the grooming gangs scandal, further splitting the ranks of her party. This statement was a dramatic turnaround, especially considering that in 2017 Champion faced harsh criticism for her statements about the exploitation of young girls by British Pakistani men. Champion stressed the need for a comprehensive national investigation, noting that local investigations are insufficient and lack the authority to coerce witnesses. This statement became a landmark, highlighting the growing internal tension in the Labour Party. Several deputies, including Champion, began to insist on a full investigation, despite the party's reluctance. Critics claim that there is a systematic cover-up of information, and many local authorities and police are accused of ignoring or mishandling cases of banditry. What do you think about this video? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you later.